In the northern part of India, there was a kingdom called Kapilavastu. Kapilavastu was located on the southern rim of the Himalayas. The kingdom was ruled by King Suddhodana of the Sakya clan. Queen Maya was his wife. Queen Maya was pregnant for 10 months. According to the ancient Indian custom, she must return to her parents' home to give birth to the baby. On her way, she passed through the beautiful Lumbini Park. Queen Maya gave birth to the dignified prince in Lumbini Park. Queen Maya returned to Kapilavastu with her new-born prince. An old sage, Asita, came to visit the prince in order to read his facial features. The old sage observed that the baby possessed great virtue in his countenance and foretold that the boy would leave home to cultivate and attain ultimate enlightenment. The old sage knelt down to worship the prince. Without realizing it, King Suddhodana followed the old sage and knelt down to worship his son. 5 days after the prince's birth, a ceremony was held to name the prince. He was named Siddhartha, which meant realization of all goals. During the naming ceremony, a young scholar named Kaudinya stated with deep conviction, "The prince will abandon the throne in pursuit of supreme wisdom and will attain ultimate enlightenment to become the supreme teacher of the world." King Suddhodana, however, wanted his son to inherit the throne when he grew up. On the 7th day after the prince's birth, Queen Maya died of illness, which saddened everyone in the kingdom. The prince's aunt, Lady Maha Prajapati, took the responsibility of rearing the prince. When the prince turned 8, the king hired all the best teachers in the land to educate him. The prince learned the art of archery and made extraordinary progress. The prince respected his teachers very much. The prince learned the art of driving a chariot. The prince treated his horse gently. The prince's heart was full of mercy and benevolence. He treated all animals kindly. For example, one day he stopped one of his servants from beating a snake with a stick. Prince Siddhartha had a cousin named Devadatta who was entirely different in character. One day, Devadatta shot down a flying swan. Prince Siddhartha rushed over to rescue the wounded bird. The prince removed the arrow from the bird's wing, wrapped the wound softly, and patted the bird. Devadatta was angry and tried to grab the bird from the prince's hands, but Prince Siddhartha stopped him and said, "While the swan is still alive, it belongs to the person who rescued it." The two boys started to argue. Scholars were invited to settle the argument in a conference. However, each scholar had a different opinion. Then one young scholar stood up and said, "When the swan is alive, it should belong to the person who rescued it, not to the person who tried to kill it." Siddhartha carefully nursed the swan until its wound completely healed. Then he let it fly away. Ancient India was an agricultural nation. People considered tilling the land and producing food grains most important. The Royal Tilling Festival was held once a year. To encourage participation, the king and his ministers all attended the ceremony. King Suddhodana took Prince Siddhartha to the ceremony. King Suddhodana was in charge of this ceremony. After the ceremony, everybody enjoyed a delightful feast, but the prince sat under a tree in deep meditation. The prince thought, "Today everyone is happy, but the oxen will have to toil even harder in the fields." When the prince noticed that all stronger animals prey on weaker animals, his heart was filled with compassion for all weaker animals. The prince meditated on how humans and all other beings indeed lived in great pain. After the royal tilling festival, King Suddhodana took the prince back to the palace. King Suddhodana ordered to have 3 splendid palaces built for the prince to live in and enjoy. The 3 palaces were built for the prince to live in for 3 different seasons: the winter, the summer, and the rainy season. There was a beautiful garden in the back of each palace. However, the prince did not enjoy these material comforts and found them meaningless. King Suddhodana held a meeting with his ministers and decided to choose a beautiful girl as the prince's wife. The king ordered the most beautiful girls in the kingdom to be sent to the palace. Each of the beautiful girls walked individually in front of the prince. Each girl received a present from the prince when passing by him. One girl of extraordinary beauty was late, so she entered the palace hurriedly. As all the presents were already given out, the prince had to take off his precious necklace to give to the girl. This girl was Princess Yasodhara. The ministers reported to the king what they saw. So the king sent a minister to the city of Devadarsita to visit the girl's father, King Supabuddha, proposing that Princess Yasodhara be married to Prince Siddhartha. According to the Sakya clan's custom, when a prince is about to marry, he must invite all the brave young men in the county to participate in various contests. Prince Siddhartha followed this custom. In the archery contest, the prince shot farther than all the other contestants. In the swordsmanship contest, the prince was also the honorable winner. In the horse racing contest, the prince raced faster than all the other contestants as well. As some of the contestants refused to accept the outcome of the contest, all of them were ordered to ride a fierce black horse. One by one, they were thrown to the ground by this horse. Even the best-known horseman, Prince Aniruddha, was thrown down to the ground. When it was Prince Siddhartha's turn, he approached the horse and gently patted the animal, rubbing its nose and murmuring a few words into its ears. Suddenly, the fierce horse calmed down, let the prince mount its back, and obediently followed the prince's instructions. Everyone concurred that Prince Siddhartha was the best among all the contestants, and King Supabuddha agreed to marry his beautiful daughter to Prince Siddhartha. King Suddhodana was in charge of the wedding ceremony. The king ordered the girls who excelled at singing and dancing to live in the palace and keep the prince entertained. The king also ordered the construction of high walls around the palace to prevent the prince from leaving the palace grounds. But the prince was not happy inside the palace. He was eager to see the outside world. The king reluctantly granted the prince's request and ordered the people to clean the roads and decorate their homes with colorful banners. As the prince's carriage toured the city, people lined up on both sides of the roads to welcome the prince. All of a sudden, an old hunchback appeared in front of the prince's carriage. Before anyone could stop the old man, the prince had already seen him. The prince was appalled at the sight of the old man's appearance. Chandaka, the prince's servant, told the prince, "After living long enough, a person will become old and feeble." The prince realized that all of his family and he himself would become old and feeble when the time came. The prince was no longer in the mood to continue the tour and ordered his driver to take him back to the palace. Back at the palace, the prince meditated every day on how to avoid becoming old and feeble. King Suddhodana was worried when he learned that the prince was not happy. The prince asked for permission from his father to go outside the palace grounds again. This time, he went disguised as a young man from a noble family, followed by Chandaka. The prince saw people at work. Some blacksmiths were making different kinds of tools. There were shops on both sides of the streets. Many people were doing business. The prince was glad to see people hard at work. Suddenly, the prince heard a moan from the roadside. Turning his head, the prince saw a man with purple discoloration on his face and body. The man lay on the ground, trying but unable to get up. A compassionate and merciful person The prince rushed over to help the sick person sit up to alleviate his pain. When Chandaka saw this, he advised the prince not to touch the sick man, fearing the prince might contract disease. The prince was appalled by the suffering from illness. Chandaka told the prince that when the patient's illness became more serious, the person would die. Chandaka told the prince, when a person dies, he will lose all consciousness, and his body will become stiff and then will be carried out for cremation. The corpse is then placed on piles of wood, and a fire is started to burn the corpse. The prince felt the fearfulness of death, as nobody could escape from it. After returning to his palace, the prince kept thinking to himself about the fearfulness of old age, illness, and death, and wanted to find a way to be freed from these troubles. One day, when the prince was relaxing in his garden, he saw a monk in a yellow robe who looked very peaceful. The prince was captivated by the idea of becoming a sramana. Just at that time, someone came to report to the prince that his wife had given birth to a baby boy, who was later named Rahula. To keep the prince happy, King Suhodana ordered more beautiful girls to sing and dance for the prince's pleasure. But the prince was in no mood to enjoy the song and dance, as his mind was preoccupied by thoughts of old age, illness, and death. Eventually, he became so tired he fell asleep. The girls also stopped singing and dancing and lay down to rest. When the prince awoke, he noticed the girls no longer appeared beautiful while sleeping. The prince decided to break away from all confinements and leave home to seek the ultimate truth. He quietly took one final look at his sleeping wife and their newborn son, not wanting to wake them. In the silence of the night, the prince mounted his faithful horse and exited the city gate. He was accompanied only by his servant, Chandaka. Upon arriving at the Anuma River, the prince dismounted his horse and slashed short his long hair with his sword. He ordered Chandaka to take his horse and his clothes back to the palace and report to his father. At age 29, the prince had left home in search of the ultimate truth. Prince Siddhartha reached Rajagara, the capital city of Magdaha. Each morning, he went into the city on his alms rounds. After receiving his food for the day, the prince would return to his dwelling. Because of Prince Siddhartha's noble appearance, people showed great respect for him. King Bibisara of Magadha also came to visit him. One day, Prince Siddhartha saw shepherds driving large flocks of sheep into the city of Rajagaha. When Siddhartha learned that the sheep were to be used as sacrifices, He followed the shepherds there, holding a little wounded lamb in his arms. A group of fire worshippers were building a large fire for a ceremony to worship the heavenly gods, which was also attended by their king. When the ceremony leader raised his knife to kill the sheep, Siddhartha immediately walked up to stop him. Siddhartha told the crowd that they would not be rewarded by killing animals. Instead, the killing would bring harm to them in the future, and that people should show kindness to all animals. The king and the fire worshippers took Siddhartha's words to heart and abandoned their plan of killing the animals. Siddhartha left the city of Rajagaha to continue his journey in search of great teachers. Siddhartha studied diligently with Arada Kalama, a sage of great learning and great virtue, and soon became as knowledgeable as his teacher. Arada Kalama taught Siddhartha how to meditate to achieve extraordinary tranquility of the mind. However, this knowledge could not answer the fundamental question of life and death. Therefore, Siddhartha left Arada Kalama to look for other teachers. Siddhartha studied with another sage, Udraka Ramaputra, and again he quickly became as knowledgeable as his teacher. Udraka Ramaputra taught Siddhartha how to silence his mind in order to become completely detached from all things, ideas, and feelings. Nevertheless, this knowledge still could not solve the problem of life and death. Siddhartha decided to stop his search for more teachers. Instead, he headed to Kaya Mountain, where there lived many Salamanas of various cults who left their families to practice asceticism. They believed that through the practice of asceticism in this life, one would be able to obtain happiness or be reborn in heavenly realms in the next life. These Sramanas were gradually reduced to skin and bones as a result of decreasing their daily food intake. Siddhartha chose a scenic and quiet place at Uruvilva and stayed there to practice austere asceticism. There were 5 Sramanas who had followed Siddhartha and became his attendants. They joined Siddhartha in his practice of austere asceticism. Eventually, they would be known as the 5 bhikshus. Siddhartha practiced austere asceticism diligently. He started fasting and became so thin that his bones were clearly visible. One day he fainted from exhaustion and weakness. Just then a shepherd boy passed by. After drinking the milk offered by the shepherd boy, Siddhartha came to. One evening the prince heard a group of girls singing, "When the strings are too loose, the lute will not make any sound. But when the strings are too tight, they will break. Only when the strings are not too loose nor too tight will the lute produce wonderful music." It then dawned upon Siddhartha that practicing asceticism 112. It then dawned upon Siddhartha that practicing asceticism too strictly was just like tightening the lute's strings too much. He decided to adopt the middle way in his practice. stopped his practice of austere asceticism and went on alms rounds and started eating again. The 5 Shramanas thought that Siddhartha had become lazy by abandoning austere asceticism, so they left him and went to Magadhava to live. Siddhartha received an offering of rice porridge from a village girl named Sujata. He also received an offering of a bundle of straw from a straw peddler. Siddhartha made a mat with a straw and vowed that he would not rise from the mat until he had attained ultimate enlightenment. He then focused on this goal in his meditation. Vivid images of his past would sometimes appear in his mind, but they would disappear with his deep meditation. Siddhartha eventually acquired the ability to be aware of all his previous lives, see all things, and know their future rebirths. He thus came to realize that the unceasing cycle of death and rebirth of all beings was solely a manifestation of one's karma, that good causes led to good results and bad causes led to bad results. He also came to understand that the ultimate causes of the endless cycle of death and rebirth were greed, hate, and ignorance. Finally, he acquired as Ravaksaya the ability to eliminate all defilements, freeing himself from all problems caused by life and death. At the age of 35, Siddhartha had attained supreme enlightenment and become the Buddha. A proud Brahmana approached Buddha and asked him, "How can one become a noble Brahmana?" Buddha replied, "In order to become a noble Brahmana, one has to abandon all evil, set aside his pride, pursue extensive learning, and practice pure living." 2 merchants passed by Buddha. Seeing his calm and dignified appearance, they reverently offered him exquisite food and requested that Buddha accept them as his disciples. In his observation, Buddha found that most people had strong desires by nature, and few had little desire. The latter were more suited for practicing the Dharma, just as it was easier for lotus flowers that grew above water to receive sunshine. Because his heart was filled with mercy and benevolence, Buddha decided to propagate the Dharma, starting from the 5 Shramanas. When the 5 Shramanas saw the Buddha approaching them from a distance, they plotted amongst themselves not to greet him. But when the Buddha walked closer, they witnessed his incomparably noble and brilliant manner, and without realizing it, they walked up to greet him. Buddha explained to the 5 Shramanas the way by which he had attained enlightenment, transcending birth and death. The 5 disciples were still doubtful, wondering how the Buddha could possibly claim to have obtained enlightenment after abandoning his practice of austere asceticism. Buddha taught the 5 Sramanas the Dharma Kakra Parvatana Sutra, and they became the first Buddhist bhiksus. One day, the son of a rich family in Margadava by the name of Yasos came to see the Buddha and asked the Buddha to let him become a monk. Yasa's entire family took refuge in the Buddha Dharma, and more than 50 of his friends also became Buddhist bhiksus. Buddha now had 60 bhiksus. He sent them out to propagate the Buddha Dharma in other lands. The Buddha went to the village of Uruviva to teach and enlighten the people. There he converted 3 brothers who were leaders of a knot hair cult, as well as their 1,000 followers. Then Buddha took his disciples to the city of Rajagaha to teach the Buddha Dharma to King Bimbisara and his people. After taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma, King Bimbisara built a dwelling amongst bamboo and offered it to Buddha. This dwelling later became known as the Bamboo Grove. One morning, Buddha encountered a young man by the name of Sujata, who stood in the middle of the road, bowing to the east, the south, the west, the north, the heaven, and the earth. He then spread grain in each of these directions. Buddha asked Sujata why he performed such a ritual. Sujata replied that he was honoring his father's last words. Buddha explained to Sujata, bowing to the east means respecting one's parents. Bowing to the south means respecting one's teachers. Bowing to the west means taking care of one's wife and children. Bowing to the north means respecting one's relatives and friends. Bowing to the heavens means paying reverence to the Sramanas, Brahmanas, and the saints. Bowing to the earth means treating servants and animals kindly. Buddha also taught Sujata the 5 precepts: to not kill, steal, commit adultery, utter false speech, nor consume intoxicants. Buddha also taught Sujata to work hard, not to be greedy, and to use his wealth wisely. In Rajagaha, there lived a leader of a well-known heretical group. The leader's name was Samjayan Veliraitiputra. He had about 200 pupils, and among them Upatisaya and Kolita were the most accomplished in their studies. One morning, Upatisaya saw a Sramana holding out his alms bowl for food. Upatisaya was amazed by the Sramana's dignified and peaceful manner. Upatisaya followed the Sramana. The Sramana told Upatisaya that he had left home to follow the Buddha. The Sramana briefly explained the Buddha's teachings. All things arise from causes and conditions. All things vanish because of causes and conditions. The Buddha always teaches so. Upon hearing these words, Upatisaya felt he had come to a sudden and deep understanding of the Buddha Dharma. Upatisaya then told the Buddha's teachings to his friend Kolita. They both went to see the Buddha, who accepted them as his disciples. Soon they attained ahathood. Because of their extraordinary wisdom and supernatural ability, they became Buddha's two chief disciples. One day, the Buddha's 1,250 Arhat disciples returned to Rajahara from distant lands to attend the Buddha's teachings in Venuvana. Buddha instructed them, do no evil, cultivate good, and purify your mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. These words of the Buddha later became known as the Pratimokkha instructions in the history of Buddhism. One day, King Suddhodana, Buddha's father, sent a minister to Rajagaha inviting the Buddha to return to his kingdom to propagate the Dharma. Buddha gladly accepted the invitation and returned to Kapilavatthu with many of his disciples. As usual, Buddha and his disciples carried their alms bowls to beg for food each morning. When King Suddhodana learned of this, he was disappointed and expressed disapproval of this practice. In the king's mind, begging for food was a disgrace to the royal throne. King Suddhodana went to see Buddha in his carriage and criticized the Buddha's practice. Buddha explained to his father that carrying the alms bowl to beg for food was a tradition passed down from past Buddhas. Its purpose was to come into close contact with people in order to teach them the Buddha Dharma. Upon hearing his son's explanation, King Suddhodana understood, and the king himself took the bowl from Buddha to beg for food. In the palace, Buddha began teaching the Buddha Dharma to his father and relatives. Buddha also taught the Buddha Dharma to Lady Yasohara. By this time, Buddha's son Rahula was 7 years old. Buddha ordained Rahula, who became the first Buddhist Shramanera. In addition, Buddha also ordained the other 6 princes of the Sakya clan as bhikshus. Many years later, King Suddhodana became severely ill. Buddha returned with many disciples to visit his father. Soon afterwards, King Suddhodana passed away. After King Suddhodana's death, Buddha's aunt, Mahaprajapati, as well as many court ladies, requested Buddha to let them join his Sangha to practice the Buddha Dharma. After careful consideration, Buddha turned down their request. The ladies tried again and were saddened when their request was turned down again. They later shaved their heads on their own, put on kasayas, and traveled on foot to Vaisali to visit Mahavana Monastery, where Buddha resided. Their journey was long and exhausting, and they were in low spirits. When Ananda saw them, he showed sympathy towards them and consoled them. Ananda promised Lady Mahaprajapati that he would ask the Buddha to allow women to join Buddha's Sangha. Ananda asked again and again, but each time he was turned down by the Buddha. Ananda reminded Buddha that he was brought up by Lady Prajapati. To show gratitude to Lady Prajapati, Ananda suggested that Buddha allow females to join the Sangha. Finally, Buddha granted their request and told the ladies that they must promise to strictly observe the 8 forms of showing respect. Lady Mahaprajapati was overjoyed with the Buddha's permission and promised she would strictly observe the 8 forms of showing respect. Ananda returned to report to Buddha that Lady Mahaprajapati was willing to observe the 8 forms of showing respect. Finally, women could also leave home to practice the Buddha Dharma. One of Buddha's disciples, Devadatta, was haughty and envious. He schemed to disrupt the Sangha. He found an ally in Ajatasattu, the crown prince of King Bimbisara, who supported him and built a temple for him. Devadatta asked Buddha to allow him to establish a new Sangha and be the leader of the new Sangha. The Buddha knew of Devadatta's intentions and turned down his request. Deviously, Devadatta suggested Prince Ajatasattu arrest his king father, imprison him, and starve him to death, so Ajatasattu could become king. After Ajatasattu became king, Devadatta plotted against Buddha's life. He suggested the king hire skillful archers to shoot Buddha. But when the archers came upon Buddha's residence and saw the peace, kindness, solemnity, and reverence in Buddha's manner, they changed their minds and became Buddha's disciples instead. One day when Buddha was walking by the foot of the mountain, Devadatta pushed a boulder down from where he hid on the mountain, intending to kill the Buddha. But the boulder missed Buddha entirely, and Buddha was not harmed. Devadatta set loose a wild elephant in an attempt to have the animal crush Buddha. But when the huge elephant approached, it was tamed by Buddha's enormous compassion and did not harm Buddha. Having failed in many attempts to take Buddha's life, Devadatta continued trying to disrupt the Sangha. He asked Buddha to enforce a more stringent code of conduct for bhikshus, such as not allowing them to eat meat and requiring them to sleep under trees. Buddha felt that such stringent rules were impractical and turned down Devadatta's request. Buddha also warned Devadatta to stop disrupting the Sangha. Devadatta ignored Buddha's warning and took a group of bhikshus away with him to form a separate Sangha that practiced under his rules. Buddha sent Sariputra to talk to this group of bhikshus, who then returned to Buddha's side. When Devadatta learned of this, he was furious. He had become very weak, so he needed to be carried in a sedan chair in order to confront Buddha. Some suggested that Buddha not receive Devadatta, but Buddha told them not to worry, as Devadatta could do no harm to the Buddha. Unexpectedly, Devadatta died along the way. There were many kingdoms in ancient India. The Buddha taught the Dharma for 45 years. He always traveled on foot and never used vehicles of any kind. Every morning, Buddha would go out on alms rounds in the neighborhoods, rich and poor. Sometimes he accepted people's invitations into their homes to receive offerings. Buddha gave teachings to the bhikshus in the monastery or under trees, encouraging them to study and practice the Dharma diligently. Sometimes the bhikshus would not understand Buddha's teachings immediately, so Buddha would patiently repeat or explain his teachings. Wherever he resided, Buddha would give Dharma talks to the people nearby, rich and poor, learned and ignorant. Some people would bring offerings to the Buddha. In the evenings, Buddha would bathe, meditate, and rest for a while before receiving bhikshus and followers from everywhere. Late in the evenings, kings or important officials would sometimes come to visit the Buddha. He would receive them and give Dharma talks to them. When they left, their hearts were always filled with joy. When it was time for him to sleep, Buddha would sleep on his right side with his legs slightly bent. His left leg rested on his right knee, his left hand on his left thigh, and his right hand bent back under his right cheek. When Buddha was 80 years old, he had taught the Dharma for 45 years. He continued to teach tirelessly to people from all walks of life, rich and poor, learned and ignorant. Buddha welcomed all visitors and gladly answered their questions. Some people purposely raised difficult questions to challenge him, but they would eventually be overwhelmed by his wisdom. As he was 80 years old, Buddha realized that his nomadic teaching life was about to come to an end. He decided to travel north with Ananda and a small group of bhikshus. He passed through Vesali, where he had previously lived, and then returned to the bamboo grove. He instructed the bhikshus to take up residence in different places. While in the bamboo grove, Buddha became seriously ill. Gradually, he recovered. One day, Buddha sat with Ananda in the shade of the monastery. Buddha told Ananda, "I am 80 years old. My time is coming to its end. Bhikshus should rely on themselves for enlightenment and take refuge in themselves. They should take refuge in and rely upon the Dharma, not in others, for enlightenment." Buddha sat under a tree and observed with his mind the cause and condition of his passing. He concluded that he would enter nirvana in 3 months. He told Ananda this. Ananda begged Buddha to stay longer in the world to teach the Dharma. At the bamboo grove, Buddha gave his bhikshus an important talk in which he encouraged them to be diligent in their study and practice of the Dharma, so that they could free themselves from the suffering caused by the endless cycle of death and rebirth. Buddha took one final look at the city of Vesali. While in the city of Pava, Buddha accepted food offered by the son of a goldsmith. The food contained a kind of fungus grown on sandalwood, which was difficult to digest. After Buddha ate this, his previous illness flared up even worse than before, yet he still continued upon his journey. On his way, Buddha met a prince of the Malda clan. Buddha gave Dharma talks to him, and the prince offered Buddha and Ananda 2 rolls of fine gold-colored fabric. After crossing the Hiranyavati River, Buddha and his companions arrived at a forest. He felt tired and could not travel any further. He told Ananda to set up a bed between 2 trees so he could rest. Knowing that Buddha was about to die, Ananda was overcome with sadness and walked away. He could not help but weep to himself. Opening his eyes, Buddha could not find Ananda, and he knew that Ananda was grieving. He sent for Ananda to return to his side. Buddha spoke of Ananda's merit in front of the other bhikshus, praising him as the most excellent attendant. Ananda asked Buddha to consider choosing a larger city to enter nirvana, as there would be many more powerful disciples to help with the arrangement of his holy remains. But Buddha assured Ananda this was not necessary. Buddha sent Ananda to Kusinagara to tell the king and the people that he would enter nirvana that night. When the king and the people of Kusinagara learned that Buddha was about to enter nirvana, they went to visit Buddha, hearts filled with sorrow. Subhadra, a nomadic man of a heretical cult, happened to be in Kusinagara. When he learned that Buddha was about to enter nirvana, he came to consult Buddha regarding some difficult questions that had puzzled him for a long time. Because Buddha was very ill, Ananda turned down Subhadra's request. Buddha overheard their conversation and knew Subhadra's intentions, so Buddha asked Ananda to let Subhadra in. After Buddha's Dharma talk, Subhadra asked to be accepted as a bhiksu. Buddha asked Ananda to shave Subhadra's head, and Subhadra was the last bhiksu enlightened by Buddha. Buddha gave the bhiksus one last chance to ask questions, but no one had any doubts about the Buddha Dharma. Buddha's last teachings to the bhiksus was, "All things are impermanent. Do not be lazy and complacent." Finally, the Buddha entered the Mahaparinirvana in the late night of the full moon day of May. A brilliant lamp of the world was extinguished, but the Buddha's great teachings will live on forever.